A city of impossible beauty rises from a barren desert. This is Petra, its temples and tombs carved directly into cliffs of rose-red stone. It looks like a mirage, a place that simply should not exist. Yet for centuries, it was not only real but thriving, a wealthy hub of trade and culture. How did an ancient people build such splendor in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth? The answer is not magic, but a forgotten science of water. You will discover the complete blueprint of the hydraulic empire that defied a desert. We will uncover how they turned deadly flash floods into life-giving streams, and how a single flaw in their genius design may have sealed the city's fate. What does it truly take for a civilization to make a wasteland bloom? The landscape surrounding Petra holds a secret contradiction. This region receives barely 6 inches of rain in an entire year, a meager amount that would barely sustain a small village. There are no great rivers carving through the stone, no reliable springs bubbling up in every valley. For most of the year, the land is a sun-baked expanse of rock and dust, a place defined by its absence of water. Yet the stones of Petra itself tell a different story entirely. Archaeologists have found the foundations of lush gardens, the outlines of large public pools, and the sophisticated plumbing for lavish bathhouses. This was a city that supported thousands of people, not a desperate outpost clinging to survival. How do you reconcile a desert that gives almost nothing with a city that lived in apparent abundance? The answer lies not in the gentle, consistent rains of more forgiving climates, but in the desert's own brutal personality. That scant annual rainfall does not arrive softly. It comes in sudden, terrifying outbursts. Dry riverbeds called wadis can transform in minutes from empty channels into raging walls of water, mud, and rock. These flash floods are incredibly destructive, capable of scouring the land and sweeping away anything in their path. For most, such an event is a catastrophe. For the Nabateans, it became a raw material. Their entire civilization was built on a radical idea. They would not fight the desert's violence, but would instead capture it, tame it, and make it work for them. The fundamental problem was therefore not a lack of water, but its chaotic and temporary nature. They needed to solve the puzzle of time, how to take a resource that appeared for only a few dangerous hours and stretch it to last for months. This is the desert paradox they mastered, turning the land's greatest threat into its only lifeline. The key to this desert paradox begins with the people themselves. To understand the water systems of Petra, you must first understand the Nabateans, and to do that, you must look past the grand stone facades. Long before they were master builders, they were masters of movement. Their origins trace back to nomadic communities, herders who followed the scarce and scattered resources of the Arabian Peninsula. Their survival depended not on conquering the desert, but on listening to it. This life required a profound, practical intimacy with the land. They learned to read subtle signs the land offered. They knew which wadis, those dry riverbeds, were most likely to channel a flash flood after a distant storm. They recognized the specific types of vegetation that hinted at subsurface moisture. They understood the patterns of seasonal winds and the way rain clouds gathered over certain mountain ranges. This was not theoretical knowledge. It was a living map of survival passed down through generations. Every decision, from where to pitch a tent to where to lead their herds, was a calculated response to the desert's harsh logic. This nomadic heritage is the crucial foundation. When these pastoralists eventually chose to settle and build Petra, they did not abandon their desert wisdom. They institutionalized it, that intimate, hard-won understanding of how water moved across a barren landscape became the blueprint for a hydraulic empire. They transitioned from finding water for their flocks to commanding it for a city. So we should not think of them merely as wealthy spice traders who happen to build clever cisterns. We should see them as pragmatic hydraulic engineers who use their trading wealth to fund projects born from a nomad's deep-seated respect for a drop of water. Their genius was in scaling up a survival skill into a civilization's infrastructure. The most photographed wonders of Petra are silent stone faces, magnificent but empty. The treasury, with its intricate columns carved into a cliff, is a breathtaking facade leading to a single, modest chamber. The monastery, perched high on a mountain, offers awe-inspiring views but tells us little of daily life. These monuments are the grand finales of a wealthy civilization, the equivalent of a crown displayed in a museum case. But to understand the kingdom that wore that crown, you must look away from the jewelry box and into the kitchen, the workshop, the streets. You must shift your gaze from what they built to show their power and instead see what they built to stay alive. The real masterpiece of Petra is not carved in a single cliff. It is etched across the entire landscape. It lies in the dry riverbeds known as wadis, in the channels cut into solid rock high on canyon walls, in the subtle terracing of distant plains. This is the city's hidden circulatory system, a network of arteries and veins that turned sporadic chaos into predictable abundance. While tourists crane their necks at the ornate tombs, the true wonder of this place flows silently beneath their feet, a story written not in sculpture but in hydrology. The facades are the answer to a question of art and wealth. The water systems are the answer to the far more urgent question of existence. They are the lifeblood that made every other achievement possible, and to follow their path is to see the desert not as a barrier, but as a partner in a centuries-long engineering project. The desert offered a brutal choice: surrender or adapt. The Nabateans chose a third path, one of profound collaboration. Their entire approach to water can be distilled into a single guiding principle, a philosophy that turned vulnerability into strength. They did not fight the desert's nature, they learned to work with it, instead of viewing the sporadic, violent flash floods as an enemy to be defeated. They saw them as an untamed resource to be harnessed. This mindset shift is everything. It meant the goal was not to repel water, but to invite it in, to capture every possible drop the sky provided, and then refuse to let it go. Their strategy was one of total catchment and meticulous control. They treated the entire landscape as a giant, tilted collecting basin. From the highest ridges to the lowest valley floors, their systems were designed to intercept rainwater right where it fell, guiding it safely away from destructive paths and into carefully managed storage. This principle of capture, not fight, meant that no water was considered wasted or lost. A storm on a distant plateau was not a remote event. It was the beginning of a deliberate journey with the Nabateans as its architects. Every terrace, every channel, every dam was built with this dual purpose: to mitigate the flood's immediate fury and to preserve its life-giving potential for the long, dry months ahead. This foundational idea is the master key that unlocks the logic behind every specific technology they employed. It transforms their work from a collection of clever tricks into a coherent, holistic system for bending a harsh environment to human will. Their genius began not at the city gates but far beyond them, on the high, windswept plains. The Nabateans thought in terms of watersheds, a concept we associate with modern environmental science. They understood that Petra sat at the bottom of a vast natural bowl. The surrounding mountains and mesas were not just scenic backdrops. They were the raised edges of that bowl, a colossal roof designed by geology itself. When rain fell anywhere across this enormous area, perhaps dozens of square miles, gravity dictated its path. Every drop began a slow, inevitable journey downward, tracing the contours of the land, merging with other droplets in tiny rivulets, then streams, until finally converging into the main channels that led toward the city center. The Nabateans did not just observe this process, They mapped it in their minds and then inscribed their will upon it. They saw the entire landscape as a single, integrated system. A storm on a distant plateau, miles from the nearest tomb or temple, was not a remote event. It was the start of a delivery process. Their job was to ensure that delivery was safe, controlled, and complete. This macro-scale vision meant their engineering projects were strategically placed at key points across this giant catchment area. They built not just to solve a local problem, but to manage the behavior of water across the entire territory. It was a form of ecological puppetry, using dams, terraces, and diversion walls to gently guide the natural flow, preventing it from becoming a destructive torrent, and instead directing it toward their reservoirs and cisterns. This was water management on a geographical scale, treating the desert not as an empty space, but as a productive field where the crop was occasional, violent rainfall, and the harvest was year-round security. The first line of defense was built directly into the path of the storm. Where a dry wadi narrowed, forming a natural funnel, the Nabateans would construct a solid barrier of stone and mortar. These were not the towering dams of modern reservoirs. They were low, broad, and incredibly strong, designed for a single, brutal event, the arrival of a flash flood. Their purpose was not to create a permanent lake, but to act as a traffic controller for chaos. When the wall of water hit, the dam would force it to slow down and spread out. This simple act of slowing the water was a stroke of genius. It dramatically reduced the water's erosive power, the very force that could carve new channels and undermine the foundations of the city. But slowing the water was only half the solution. The other half was redirection. Built into these diversion dams were carefully engineered openings like stone spouts. These openings fed the now tamed floodwaters into a secondary, man-made network. The water was not allowed to continue its wild, natural course. Instead, it was ushered into precisely cut channels or rock-hewn tunnels that acted as alternative highways, leading the water away from vulnerable areas and toward places where it could be stored or used. A perfect example still stands at the very entrance to Petra's most famous corridor, the Civic. Before you walk through that majestic, narrow canyon, you pass a substantial stone dam built across the mouth of the wadi that feeds into it. This dam was Petra's front door guard. Its job was to intercept floodwaters that would otherwise roar directly into the Civic, a place where thousands of people and animals traveled. By diverting that destructive potential into a man-made tunnel carved through the adjacent cliff, the Nabateans protected their main artery and simultaneously captured the water for the city's needs. A single structure thus performed two vital functions. It was a shield against disaster and a spigot for survival. To walk the Civic is to pass through the throat of the desert itself. This winding canyon, over a mile long, with cliffs soaring hundreds of feet high, is nature's grandest entranceway. Its towering walls of striated red and orange stone close in, leaving only a slender ribbon of sky above. For every visitor, ancient and modern, this passage builds a profound sense of anticipation, a slow reveal toward the treasury's hidden facade. But the Nabateans saw this magnificent geology with utterly pragmatic eyes. To them, the Civic was not merely a road, it was the city's main pipeline. They recognized its natural shape as a perfect catchment funnel. When rain fell on the vast plateaus above, it would cascade down these sheer cliffs, gathering into rivulets that would merge and gain force as they plunged toward the canyon floor. Left unchecked, this water would turn the Civic into a deadly chute, a torrent of mud and rock that would make the passage impassable and erode the very path they depended on. Their solution was a feat of engineering so seamlessly integrated that most visitors today walk right over it. They carved a narrow, deep channel directly into the bedrock along the entire length of the sixth floor. This was not a haphazard trench. It was a precision-cut conduit, often covered with flat stone slabs to prevent evaporation and contamination. Think of it as a covered gutter running the entire length of a monumental hallway, but one designed to capture every drop of water that touched the walls. The system was elegantly simple. Water running down the cliffs would be caught at the base by this channel. The gentle, consistent slope of the sixth floor then did all the work, guiding this collected water by gravity alone on a slow, steady journey directly into the heart of the city. They transformed a potential natural hazard into a reliable municipal water supply. The slabs covering the channel served a dual purpose. They kept the water clean from debris and animals, essentially creating an ancient subterranean aqueduct, while also allowing the channel to function as the very roadway people and caravans walked upon. You were literally traversing the city's main artery. This single feature exemplifies their holistic genius. They did not fight the canyon's nature. They augmented it, turning a spectacular geological accident into the core component of their survival infrastructure. The water that flowed here didn't just quench thirst. It fed the gardens, filled the pools, and supplied the bathhouses, making the splendor of Petra not just possible but sustainable. This captured water now faced its next critical journey: distribution. From the main channels like the one in the Sic, the lifeblood of Petra needed to reach every neighborhood, every garden, and every home. This required a second, even more intricate network, a web of aqueducts that acted as the city's veins and capillaries. Unlike the monumental stone channels of the Romans, which marched across the landscape on towering arches, the Nabatean system was often subtle, hugging the contours of the land. They built both open channels carved directly into rock or lined with stone, and covered conduits to protect the water's purity. In many places, they used ceramic pipes, carefully fitted together and sealed with waterproof plaster to prevent precious seepage into the thirsty ground. But the true marvel of this network was not just its materials, it was its invisible mathematics. To move water without pumps, using only the pull of gravity, requires a perfect, consistent slope. Too steep, and the water rushes through with destructive force, eroding the channels. Too flat, and it stagnates, becoming a breeding ground for illness. The Nabateans mastered a gentle, precise gradient, often as slight as a 1% decline. Imagine laying a pipe for a mile and ensuring it drops only about 50 feet over that entire distance, all while navigating rocky hillsides and winding around natural obstacles. This demonstrates an astonishingly advanced skill in surveying and hydraulic engineering. They had to calculate these minute angles across Petra's wildly complex terrain, ensuring a steady, reliable trickle reached the public fountains, the private villas, and the vast agricultural terraces on the city's outskirts. This gravity-fed system was a silent, constant miracle. It meant that a resident of Petra, high in a hillside dwelling, could simply open a tap fed by a ceramic pipe and receive water that began its journey as a flash flood miles away, meticulously guided, filtered, and delivered by a system of brilliant, patient design. But gravity-fed delivery is only half the equation. The desert does not offer a steady, reliable stream. It gives its water in sudden, overwhelming gifts and then takes it away for months at a time. To truly master this environment, the Nabateans had to master time itself. They needed a way to pause the bounty, to hold the life of the storm in suspension against the long, silent drought. Their solution was a network of artificial oases hidden in plain sight, a vast array of cisterns and reservoirs, the city's strategic water savings account. These were not mere holes in the ground. They were carefully engineered vaults designed to capture the seasonal floodwater and protect it from the relentless sun and wind. The scale varied dramatically, from monumental public works to humble private stores, reflecting a society built on shared security and individual responsibility. Near the heart of the city, adjacent to the Great Temple, archaeologists have uncovered a massive public reservoir. Hewn from the bedrock and lined with stone, This pool could hold hundreds of thousands of gallons. It served as a central bank of water for the community, a resource for public ceremonies, for supplying the nearby bathhouse, and perhaps for emergency use during prolonged dry spells. Its size was a statement of civic confidence, a declaration that Petra could not only survive but flourish through the harshest seasons. Yet for every grand public reservoir, there were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of smaller private cisterns. Carved into the bedrock beneath homes and courtyards, or built as underground chambers lined with stone, these personal tanks were the backbone of daily life. Every household, it seems, was expected to participate in the city's hydrological discipline. After a rain, channels on rooftops and in courtyards would direct runoff into these subterranean stores. The design was brilliantly simple. A narrow opening at the top, often covered with a stone slab, minimized evaporation and kept debris and animals out. Inside, the walls were coated with a thick, impermeable plaster made from lime and crushed pottery. This waterproof lining was crucial. Without it, the precious water would simply seep back into the thirsty ground, lost forever. These cisterns transformed every home into a self-sufficient bastion against the desert. A family could draw from their private reserve for drinking, cooking, and washing, reducing the constant demand on the public system. This distributed model of storage created incredible resilience. Even if one cistern cracked or a main channel was temporarily blocked, the city's water security was not concentrated in a single point of failure. It was dispersed, decentralized, and deeply embedded in the very fabric of Petra. The seasonal flood was thus not a fleeting event. It was a harvest patiently gathered and meticulously stored, drop by drop, in 1,000 stone bellies scattered across the city, ensuring that the memory of rain lasted long after the last cloud had vanished from the sky. Yet even the most ingenious system of surface channels and cisterns has its limits. The desert sun is a patient, relentless thief, slowly stealing water through evaporation no matter how well a reservoir is covered. To build a civilization that could endure for centuries, the Nabateans needed a more permanent source, a deeper kind of security. They needed to reach beyond the fleeting gift of the rainstorm and tap into the desert's hidden savings account. This meant turning their attention downward to the silent, slow-moving rivers that flow not across the land but deep beneath it. Their mastery of water was not confined to what fell from the sky. It extended into the very bones of the earth, to the art of finding and managing groundwater. This required a different kind of knowledge, an understanding of geology and hidden signals. They learned to read the landscape for clues to the water below. A cluster of certain plants, a particular rock formation, or even a subtle depression in the ground could indicate an aquifer, a layer of porous rock saturated with water lying somewhere beneath the surface. One of their most celebrated achievements in this realm was their enhancement of natural springs. A spring is a place where groundwater, under pressure, finds a crack or fissure and flows out onto the surface. The Nabateans did not simply use these springs as they found them. They improved them, engineering them to maximize their output and protect their purity. The most famous example lies just outside Petra, at a place known as Ain Musa, or Moses Spring. According to local tradition, this is where Moses struck the rock and brought forth water for the Israelites. Whether or not that story is historical, the Nabateans certainly saw the spring's immense value. They did not leave it as a muddy seep. They built an elaborate spring house around it, a stone structure that captured the emerging water, channeled it into a clean, stone-lined basin, and then fed it directly into the main aqueduct system leading into Petra. This transformed a natural curiosity into a reliable, municipal water source. They essentially put a tap on the earth itself, formalizing and securing a gift from the underground world. But springs are rare gifts. To truly command groundwater, the Nabateans had to go and get it. This meant digging wells, and they became masters of this arduous, dangerous craft. They did not dig haphazardly. Their well locations were chosen with strategic precision, often at the lowest points in valleys where water would naturally collect in the subsurface, or along suspected fault lines where aquifers might be closer to the surface. Some of these wells were astonishingly deep, requiring immense labor to carve through layer after layer of rock. The walls were carefully lined with stone to prevent collapse, and protective stone copings were built around the top to keep sand and debris from falling in. Drawing water from such depths was itself an engineering challenge, likely involving ropes, buckets, and perhaps even simple lifting mechanisms. Each well was a monumental investment in effort, a testament to their determination to leave nothing to chance. By combining their sophisticated management of surface runoff with this deep exploitation of groundwater, the Nabateans demonstrated a complete understanding of the hydrological cycle. They were not just capturing rain, they were engaging with every phase of water's journey, from the moment it fell from the clouds and rushed across the wadis, to the time it seeped into the earth and began its slow, centuries-long migration through stone. They intercepted it on the surface, they stored it in cisterns, and when necessary, they reached down into the darkness to pull it back up. This holistic approach gave Petra a resilience that was almost unimaginable. It meant the city had multiple, redundant sources of life. If the seasonal rains failed one year, the springs and wells could compensate. If a spring slowed, the reservoirs from the last flood could bridge the gap. They had woven a safety net of water with strands made of flood, spring, and well, and in doing so, they turned a desert stronghold into a place of profound and enduring abundance. The water's journey culminated in the heart of the city itself, transforming from a captured resource into the very pulse of civic life. Once the channels and pipes delivered their precious cargo into Petra's urban core, it was used with an intention that reveals a sophisticated society. This was not merely about survival, it was about creating a living, vibrant environment that defied its desert setting. Evidence shows that piped water reached every level of Petra's society. Public squares were graced with ornate nymphea, grand public fountains that were far more than water sources. These were monuments to abundance, where the sound of splashing water provided a constant, cool soundtrack to daily commerce and conversation. They were symbols of civic pride and control, a visible demonstration that the Nabateans had mastered their world. The water that flowed here was for drinking, for washing, and for pure, refreshing display. This engineered bounty extended into the private sphere. Excavations of the so-called Great Temple Complex and wealthy residential villas reveal an impressive network of small-diameter terracotta pipes embedded within walls and underfloors. These pipes supplied water directly to ornate basins, private baths, and even, in some larger homes, to upper-story rooms. Imagine the luxury in a desert city of having running water ascend to a second-floor chamber. It speaks to a hydraulic system with significant pressure and precision, a utility that supported both health and a high standard of comfortable living. This was not a privilege reserved for a tiny elite alone. The widespread presence of private cisterns beneath more modest homes suggests that a basic level of water security was a common expectation, a fundamental part of the Nabatean social contract. But a truly advanced urban system must manage water's entire cycle, not just its delivery. The Nabateans understood this completely. Alongside the channels that brought clean water in, they built a separate network to carry waste and runoff out. Archaeologists have uncovered carefully sloped stone drains running beneath streets and alongside buildings, designed to channel rainwater and wastewater away from living areas. In some structures, they have even identified what appear to be early sewer conduits, suggesting a concern for sanitation and public health that rivals much later civilizations. This closed-loop thinking is what marks their system as truly holistic. Water was captured, stored, distributed for use, displayed for beauty, and then safely removed to prevent stagnation and illness. It was a comprehensive philosophy of urban hydrology where every drop was accounted for, from the moment it fell as rain on a distant plateau to the moment it was carried away from a city street. The management of water within Petra's walls was therefore a mirror of their broader ethos. It was about creating order from chaos, beauty from utility, and a sustainable, healthy community in the most unlikely of places. The silent, flowing water in a villa's pipe was the final proof of a promise kept. The desert had not just been endured, it had been domesticated. The lifeblood of Petra did more than fill fountains and baths. It fed a city. A population of thousands could not survive on trade goods alone. The ultimate test of their hydraulic empire was not the grandeur of their temples, but the quiet productivity of their fields. Beyond the carved facades and bustling streets, the Nabateans faced the desert's most fundamental challenge: growing food. Their solution transformed barren slopes into a green, productive landscape, an agricultural oasis engineered with the same patient genius as their urban waterworks. The evidence lies not in grand monuments, but in the subtle, enduring scars they left upon the land. On the hillsides surrounding Petra, you can still trace the outlines of vast stone-walled terraces. These were not haphazard piles of rock. They were carefully constructed steps cut into the mountainside, each one a level platform held back by a retaining wall. Their purpose was twofold, and both functions were vital. First, they solved the problem of erosion. In a landscape prone to sudden, violent runoff, precious topsoil would simply be washed away in the first heavy rain. These terraces acted as a series of gentle traps, catching the soil and holding it in place, creating stable, flat planting beds where none existed naturally. Second, and more brilliantly, they were designed to capture and utilize every possible drop of moisture. The design of these terraces was hydrological. When rain fell on the higher slopes, instead of racing destructively downhill, it would be slowed and spread across each level platform. The water would soak deeply into the soil held behind each stone wall, hydrating the crops planted there. Any excess water would not vanish. It would seep slowly through the terrace wall or be channeled via small gaps to gently irrigate the terrace below. This created a cascading system of irrigation, where a single rainfall could hydrate multiple levels of crops. It was a way of stretching a scant resource across the maximum possible area, turning a hillside into a layered, water-efficient farm. The terraces likely supported staple crops like wheat, barley, and legumes, the caloric foundation of the city's diet. But the Nabatean ambition for greenery reached even closer to home. Within the city's very heart, between the tombs and the temples, archaeologists have found evidence of garden plots and orchards. Soil analysis and the remains of planting pits suggest spaces that were once lush with fruit trees, vines, and vegetables. These were not sprawling farms, but cultivated pockets of paradise, likely irrigated by a network of small, controlled channels branching off from the main aqueducts. Imagine the sensory contrast, walking from the blazing heat of a stone plaza into the dappled shade of a fig orchard, the air cool and moist, the sound of water trickling in a nearby channel. This was agriculture transformed from mere subsistence into an act of civic beautification and personal luxury. It meant fresh dates, grapes, and figs could be grown within the city walls, a stunning display of control over the environment. This move from survival to self-sufficiency to sensory pleasure reveals the full depth of their achievement. The water system did not just prevent starvation. It enabled a quality of life that made Petra not just a fortress or a marketplace, but a true home, a place where the desert was compelled to bear fruit and provide shade. The terraced hills were their breadbasket, and the garden courtyards were their living rooms, all sustained by the same relentless, patient engineering that turned floodwater into foliage. Beneath the stone streets and within the walls of Petra's grandest buildings, a second, hidden city pulsed with life. This was a network of terracotta arteries, a testament to a level of technical sophistication that moves beyond simple water capture into the realm of precise, pressurized delivery. These ceramic pipes were the final, critical link between the grand catchment systems and the individual tap, the garden plot, or the private bath. Their creation began with the earth itself. Artisans would carefully mix local clay, shaping it into cylindrical sections, each about 2 feet long. Before firing, they engineered a brilliant interlocking design. One end of each pipe section was tapered to a narrower diameter, while the other end was flared into a bell shape. This allowed the narrow end of one pipe to fit snugly inside the bell of the next, creating a tight, continuous conduit. To seal these joints completely against leaks, they used a waterproof mortar, often a mix of lime and crushed ceramics, ensuring not a single precious drop was lost to seepage into the thirsty ground. The pipes were then fired in kilns, a process that transformed the soft clay into a hard, durable ceramic, resistant to the minerals in the water and the pressures of the system. This standardized modular design meant pipes could be manufactured in quantity and assembled efficiently on site, like an ancient, life-giving plumbing kit. But the true innovation was in their application. Unlike open channels that simply followed the land's slope, these sealed pipes could be embedded. Builders laid them within the thick walls of homes and public buildings, or buried them in trenches beneath floors and courtyards. This protected the water from contamination and evaporation, but it also enabled something remarkable: the defiance of gravity on a small scale. Because the system was sealed, water pressure could build within it. This pressure, generated by the overall elevation drop from the distant reservoir or cistern, allowed water to be pushed upward, not just along. It meant that a wealthy homeowner could have a fountain in their central courtyard, fed by a pipe running beneath the paving stones. More impressively, it meant that water could be delivered to an upper story room. Archaeologists have found evidence of these small diameter pipes leading to second levels in Petra's larger villas. Imagine the quiet luxury of that moment. A resident high above the dusty streets could access clean, flowing water without sending a servant to a public fountain. This was not just convenience, it was a profound demonstration of control. A hydraulic victory that turned a basic necessity into a feature of architectural elegance. The same principle applied to the city's interior gardens. Precise, targeted irrigation lines could branch off from a main pipe, delivering water directly to the root systems of prized fruit trees or decorative plants, maximizing efficiency and minimizing waste. These humble terracotta tubes, therefore, represent the pinnacle of Nabatean hydraulic thinking. They move the system from the macro to the micro, from managing floods across a landscape to delivering a controlled, on-demand stream to a specific point of need. In their seamless joints and buried paths, we see the final, elegant flourish of a civilization that did not just bring water to a desert, but learned to weave it into the very fabric of daily life. Yet all these channels, pipes, and cisterns would have been useless if they leaked. Petra is built from sandstone, a rock that is famously porous. Imagine pouring water into a sponge and expecting it to flow for miles. It would simply vanish, absorbed by the thirsty stone in moments. This was the silent, invisible enemy the Nabateans faced every single day. Their entire hydraulic empire depended on solving one basic problem: how to make a sponge hold water. Their answer was a material innovation so crucial it was as important as any dam or aqueduct. They invented a special, waterproof plaster, a kind of hydraulic cement that turned their porous stone containers into impermeable vaults. This plaster was their secret weapon against seepage, and its recipe reveals a practical, local genius. They began with lime, produced by burning limestone in kilns. This created quicklime, a caustic powder that, when mixed with water, undergoes a chemical reaction and hardens into a solid. But plain lime mortar is brittle and can crack. The Nabatean breakthrough was in their aggregate, the material they mixed into the lime paste. Instead of using common sand, which would still allow water to penetrate, they used finely crushed pottery sherds or, in some areas, volcanic ash. These materials are rich in silicates. When mixed with the wet lime, they create a chemical bond that forms a crystalline structure as it cures. This structure is incredibly dense and non-porous. The result was a plaster that was not just sticky but truly waterproof. It could be troweled onto the walls and floors of a cistern or channel, where it would harden into a seamless, glass-like lining. A single millimeter of this plaster could mean the difference between a reservoir that held water for a year and one that drained in a week. They applied it with care, often in multiple layers, ensuring every crack and pore in the sandstone was sealed forever. This technology was a direct precursor to the famous Roman concrete, yet it was developed independently to meet the desperate needs of a desert kingdom. Without this humble, unsung plaster, the grand design would have failed. The flash floods captured in the wadis would have soaked into the ground beneath the channels. The water stored in cisterns would have slowly trickled back into the earth. The entire magnificent system would have bled out into the desert, a beautiful idea undone by a fundamental flaw. So while we marvel at the scale of their dams and the precision of their channels, we should also save our admiration for the craftsmen who mixed this simple, revolutionary paste. Their innovation meant that every drop of water once captured was held in a permanent embrace, forced to serve the city rather than escape to the depths below. It was the final, invisible lock on the desert's treasure. The physical remains of dams and channels are only the visible expression of a deeper genius. To create a network that functioned for centuries, the Nabateans first had to solve a series of invisible problems of mathematics and space. They needed to know, with astonishing accuracy, exactly where the water would go. This required a form of applied foresight we now call surveying, and their mastery of it was the silent foundation of everything they built. Before a single stone was set, teams of planners must have walked the rugged terrain, mapping the entire watershed in their minds. They had to identify the highest collection points and trace the most efficient, gentle path to the city's storage centers. This was not guesswork. It was a deliberate, calculated science of the landscape. They were creating a topographic blueprint entirely from observation and experience, understanding that a mistake in slope of just a few degrees could render a mile-long channel useless. Their most breathtaking achievement lies in the consistency of their gradients. To move water using only gravity, the slope must be perfect. Too steep, and the water rushes with destructive force, scouring the channel walls and arriving in a useless surge. Too shallow, and it stagnates, becoming a breeding ground for illness and eventually stopping altogether. The Nabateans achieved a remarkably gentle, consistent decline, often as slight as 1%. Over a distance of 1 mile, that means the channel drops only about 50 feet. Now, imagine establishing that precise, unwavering slope across Petra's chaotic terrain over rocky outcrops, around bends, through narrow defiles without lasers, without transits, without even a simple spirit level as we know it. How did they do it? While we lack their specific tools, the principles are clear. They almost certainly used a form of water level, a simple but brilliant device. A long, shallow trough filled with water, or perhaps 2 connected vessels, creates a perfectly level sightline because water always finds its own level. By marking points of equal height at intervals, they could chart a consistent downhill path. They may have used sighting poles and measured shadows cast by the sun to determine direction and rough elevation changes. This was geometry and astronomy applied to the most practical of problems. Every terrace on a hillside farm, every channel in the sick, every pipe leading to a home had to obey this relentless, invisible law of gravity. Their success speaks to a society that valued meticulous planning and long-term thinking. They were not just builders reacting to floods. They were the mathematicians of rainfall, the cartographers of invisible rivers, proving that the true architecture of Petra was drafted not on parchment, but in angles and slopes calculated beneath a desert sun. A system this vast could not run itself. The dams, channels, and cisterns of Petra were not just static monuments. They were a living, breathing utility, a complex machine that required constant care to function. The physical infrastructure we marvel at today was only the hardware. The true software was the sophisticated social organization that maintained it, a web of knowledge, labor, and law that kept the water flowing year after year. Without this human framework, the entire hydraulic empire would have crumbled into ruin within a generation. Imagine the relentless demands of the desert. A single flash flood, while providing life-giving water, would also dump tons of silt and debris into the carefully carved channels. That brilliant plaster lining the cisterns would develop hairline cracks over time, threatening catastrophic leaks. Disputes would inevitably arise over who had the right to water from a particular channel and for how long. These were not occasional problems, they were the daily, grinding reality of survival in Petra. To address them, the Nabateans almost certainly developed a dedicated corps of specialists, a kind of ancient public works department. This would have included skilled engineers who understood hydrology and surveying, masons who could repair stonework and reapply waterproof plaster, and teams of laborers tasked with the vital, unglamorous work of clearing silt after every major rain. Their work was a perpetual cycle of prevention and repair, a silent battle against entropy in a harsh environment. This maintenance was not optional. A blocked channel could divert a flood into a residential area. A leaking cistern could mean starvation for a family months later. The system's reliability depended on this unseen army of caretakers, whose expertise was as critical as that of the original builders. But technical skill alone was not enough. Water in a desert city is power. Its distribution must be managed with fairness and authority to prevent conflict and ensure civic stability. This points to another layer of social organization, administration. There was likely a system of water rights overseen by officials or community elders. They would have been responsible for allocating water from public reservoirs to different neighborhoods, setting schedules for irrigation of the terraced farms, and adjudicating disputes between households or merchants. This framework transformed water from a wild, natural force into a regulated civic resource. It meant that a farmer on the outskirts of the city knew when he could open a sluice gate to water his crops, and a potter in the urban center knew her household cistern would be replenished from the public supply according to an understood rule. This social contract, this agreement to manage a shared resource for the common good, was the glue that held the physical system together. It framed water not as a private commodity to be hoarded, but as a public trust to be meticulously stewarded. The enduring success of Petra, therefore, was not just a triumph of engineering, but a triumph of collective action and governance. The silent, flowing water in a channel was proof of a society that could organize itself around a common purpose, maintaining the delicate balance between human need and desert law for centuries on end. The Roman aqueduct is an icon of ancient engineering, a symbol of imperial power marching across the landscape on towering stone arches. It represents a philosophy of conquest. The Roman approach was to identify a distant, abundant source, a spring or a river, and then conquer the distance using gravity and monumental construction to bring that water directly to the city. It was a linear, aggressive act of appropriation, showcasing an empire's ability to bend geography to its will through sheer force and scale. The Nabatean system presents a stark and brilliant contrast. There was no distant, plentiful river to tap. The only source was the unpredictable sky above their own barren territory. Therefore, their philosophy was not one of conquest but of profound conservation. They could not afford to bring water from far away, so they became masters of harvesting every single drop that fell on their land. Their genius was intensive and localized, a deep, meticulous engagement with their immediate environment. Where the Romans built outward to capture a single large source, the Nabateans built inward to capture 1,000 small ones. Think of it as the difference between a single, massive pipeline from a mountain reservoir and an intricate, city-wide sponge designed to absorb and retain every passing shower. This fundamental difference in context dictated everything. The Roman system prioritized constant flow and volume, supporting vast public baths, fountains, and latrines that ran continuously. The Nabatean system, however, was built around the concept of storage and patience. Their channels were not just for transport, but for slow, deliberate collection. Their cisterns were not incidental tanks, but the very heart of the design. Every component worked to interrupt the water's natural journey, to pause it, to save it for the inevitable dry season. In terms of spectacle, the Roman aqueduct is undeniably more dramatic. Yet in terms of hydrological sophistication and adaptation to an extreme environment, the Nabatean approach was arguably more advanced. It required a finer understanding of microhydrology, of evaporation rates, of soil moisture, and of seasonal timing. It was a system built on the principle of scarcity, where efficiency was not an ideal but an absolute necessity for survival. The Romans demonstrated how to move water gloriously across space. The Nabateans demonstrated how to stop water in its tracks and stretch it across time. One was a statement of empire, the other was a masterpiece of existential ingenuity. The ultimate test of their system was not in a single storm, but in the quiet, ordinary day. At its peak, Petra would have been a symphony of controlled flow. A resident waking in the cool dawn would hear not the silence of a desert, but the gentle, constant trickle of water in a nearby channel, a sound as fundamental to the city as the murmur of the marketplace. Stepping outside, they would see streets swept clean by the same efficient drains that carried away the night's wastewater, preventing the stagnation and illness that plagued other ancient cities. Their walk to the public square would take them past courtyard walls, from behind which the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine hinted at private gardens thriving in the shade. The center of civic life was not a dusty plaza, but a space animated by water. Ornate public fountains bubbled continuously, fed by the relentless gravity of the system. Here, people gathered not just to draw water, but to socialize, to conduct business, to see and be seen in an environment that defied the harsh world beyond the canyon walls. The water in these fountains was a performance of security, a live demonstration that the Nabateans had rewritten the rules of their environment. This reliability rippled out to every corner of society. The terraced farms on the surrounding hillsides were not struggling plots, but productive green steps against the red rock, yielding steady harvests of grain and fruit that fed the population without sole reliance on precarious trade caravans. The bathhouses offered not just cleanliness but a social luxury, a space where water was abundant enough for leisure and ritual. In the wealthy villas, the soft splash of a private courtyard fountain provided a backdrop to daily life, a sensory luxury made possible by those hidden terracotta pipes. This was the hydraulic regime in full expression, a closed loop of capture, storage, distribution, use, and drainage operating with such seamless efficiency that it became invisible. The desert outside was defined by scarcity and shock. Petra, within its engineered embrace, was defined by predictability and abundance. The city did not just exist in the desert. It created a microclimate of its own, a bubble of sustained life where every component, the distant dam, the channel in the sick, the plaster-lined cistern, the garden terrace, worked in concert. The result was a civilization that felt not merely secure, but lush and vibrant, a living testament to the idea that the greatest human monuments are not always carved in stone, but are forged in the relentless, patient pursuit of a single, life-giving drop. But a system built on such delicate balance carries its own seeds of fragility. The very perfection of Petra's water network relied on a relentless, unbroken cycle of human attention. It was a masterpiece of equilibrium, but equilibrium is a state that must be constantly defended. The first vulnerability was time itself, and the slow, inevitable accumulation of the desert's own dust. Every flash flood, while delivering life, also carried a hidden tax: tons of fine silt, sand, and debris. This sediment would settle in the bottoms of the reservoirs and the gentle gradients of the channels. A well-maintained society would have teams regularly cleaning out these deposits, dredging the cisterns and scouring the conduits to preserve their capacity and flow. But this was backbreaking, perpetual labor. If that maintenance faltered, even for a generation, the consequences would compound quietly. A reservoir that slowly fills with silt holds less water each year. A channel clogged with debris cannot deliver its full supply, causing water to back up or spill over in unintended places. The system's efficiency would gradually choke on the very substance it was designed to capture, its arteries slowly narrowing. This siltation was a silent, incremental threat, a measure of how far the society had strayed from the disciplined upkeep of its founders. Yet a more immediate danger lurked in the infrastructure's physical integrity. That brilliant waterproof plaster lining the cisterns was not immortal. It could crack from subtle earth movements, freeze-thaw cycles in rare cold snaps, or simply the stress of centuries. A single, undetected fissure in a major reservoir could lead to a catastrophic leak, draining a community's strategic reserve into the porous earth below. Similarly, a diversion dam left unrepaired after a particularly violent flood might develop a weak point. The next seasonal surge could exploit that flaw, bursting through and washing away not just the dam, but also the channels and terraces downstream. One unmaintained breach could cascade into systemic failure, turning a controlled delivery system back into the destructive force it was meant to tame. These were not hypothetical risks. They were the inherent pressures in a design that so perfectly opposed the desert's nature. The system was a sustained act of defiance, and defiance requires constant energy. When that energy, the social will, the organized labor, the specialized knowledge began to wane, the infrastructure did not simply age gracefully. It began to unravel in ways that were both slow and sudden, a quiet decay punctuated by moments of dramatic collapse. The genius of Petra was that it made the impossible seem effortless. Its vulnerability was that this effortlessness was always an illusion, maintained by thousands of hands and minds working in concert, year after year, for century upon century. The desert's most patient threat, however, was not the sun or the silt. It was the ground beneath their feet. Petra sits in a region crisscrossed by ancient geological faults, places where the immense plates of the Earth's crust meet and grind against one another. Over centuries, this tension builds until it releases in a sudden, violent shudder, an earthquake. For all its resilience against the predictable chaos of weather, Petra's water system harbored a profound and hidden fragility against this unpredictable force. An earthquake does not merely shake buildings, it rewrites the landscape in moments, altering the very foundation upon which precision engineering depends. The Nabatean system's greatest strength, its meticulous, gravity-reliant geometry, became its most catastrophic weakness when the Earth itself moved. Consider a single, deep crack propagating through bedrock during a tremor. It could travel directly through the wall of a major reservoir, shattering that vital waterproof plaster lining from the inside out. A cistern that had safely held water for generations could be emptied in hours, its life-saving contents bleeding silently back into the earth through fractures too deep and numerous to repair. But the damage was rarely so isolated. The carefully carved tunnels that diverted floods away from the sick could suffer partial collapses, blocked by fallen rock. The elegant, open channels snaking along hillsides cut into solid rock could be shifted by just a few inches. This misalignment, imperceptible to the eye, would be fatal to the flow. Water following a 1% slope is obedient to the millimeter. If a section of channel is tilted upward by a seismic jolt, even slightly, the water would simply pool behind the obstruction and go no further. The entire gradient, calculated over miles with such patient genius, would be broken. A single blocked or misaligned segment could render an entire aqueduct branch useless, cutting off water to a neighborhood or a set of farm terraces downstream. The system was a chain, and an earthquake could break its weakest link. While the Nabateans could design for the annual fury of flash floods, they could not engineer against the capricious violence of the planet. A major seismic event did not just cause damage to repair, it could dismantle the core logic of their hydraulic world, turning a network of abundance into a series of disconnected, dysfunctional fragments. The maintenance crews could clear silt and patch plaster, but realigning a shattered landscape that required a level of coordinated effort and technical knowledge that a society in decline might no longer possess. The earthquake, therefore, was more than a disaster. It was a test of social cohesion, a sudden demand for immense labor and expertise that asked a piercing question. Did the people of Petra still have the will and the means to rebuild the miracle their ancestors had created? Yet the water system's greatest enemy may not have been the earth, but the shifting sands of commerce and power. Petra's hydraulic empire was not built on altruism, but on immense wealth, the kind of wealth that funds armies of engineers and maintenance crews for centuries. That wealth flowed not from water but from trade. The city sat at a crucial crossroads, a hub where incense from Arabia, silks from China, and spices from India passed through Nabatean hands. This economic engine generated the surplus needed to pay for the constant, labor-intensive upkeep of dams, channels, and cisterns. It supported the social structure, the administrators, the skilled masons, the dedicated laborers that turned engineering blueprints into a living, functioning utility. But trade routes are not permanent. Over time, new maritime paths opened. The Romans developed more efficient sea lanes across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, allowing goods to bypass the arduous desert caravan journey altogether. Slowly, inexorably, Petra's position as an indispensable middleman began to erode. The caravans grew smaller, less frequent. The tariffs and taxes that filled the city's coffers dwindled. This was not a sudden collapse but a slow leak of prosperity, a gradual dimming of the economic light that had sustained everything. With declining revenue, priorities necessarily shifted. A city struggling to maintain its basic security and civic functions would find it harder to justify the enormous, ongoing cost of hydraulic maintenance. The specialized guilds of plasterers who knew the secret recipe for the waterproof lining, the surveyors who could realign a fractured aqueduct, these experts might not be trained or replaced as the old masters passed away. The social contract that organized community labor for the annual dredging of reservoirs could fray, as people focused more on individual survival than collective, long-term investment. What emerges is a vicious cycle of decay. Less trade meant less money meant neglected maintenance made the water system more fragile. A fragile system was more vulnerable to the next earthquake or flood. And each disaster required even more resources to repair, resources a poorer Petra could no longer muster. The physical cracks in the plaster mirrored growing cracks in the social and political fabric. Leadership consumed by crises of revenue and authority may have lacked the vision or the means to launch the grand restoration projects of their ancestors. The meticulous upkeep that had been a non-negotiable pillar of Nabatean life became a luxury they could no longer afford. Thus, the system did not fail because the Nabateans forgot its importance. It failed because the complex civilization that built it and sustained it was itself changing, its economic foundation crumbling away. The water network was a living reflection of the society that created it. When that society lost its wealth and cohesion, the miracle in the desert began, piece by piece, to forget how to breathe. A single broken channel could begin the unraveling of everything. The true collapse of Petra was likely not a dramatic siege or a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, grinding failure of a cycle. Imagine a key diversion dam, already weakened by age, finally giving way during a powerful earthquake. The breach itself is a localized event, but its consequences ripple outward in a deadly spiral. The dam's failure means a primary aqueduct feeding the city's lower districts runs dry. Suddenly, a neighborhood that relied on that steady flow finds its public fount silent and its garden terraces beginning to wither. The immediate response would be a scramble for solutions, a redirecting of other resources. But here, the prior economic decline proves decisive. The city no longer has a deep reserve of skilled labor and materials to launch a swift, massive reconstruction. A repair that might have taken months in Petra's golden age now drags on for years or is never fully completed at all. The reduced water supply forces difficult choices. Agricultural terraces downstream of the break are abandoned first, as the water to sustain them is simply no longer there. This loss of local food production increases reliance on expensive imports at a time when trade wealth is already fading. For the families in the affected district, the calculus of survival shifts. The inconvenience of carrying water from a distant public well becomes a daily hardship. The loss of a productive home garden means less food and less income. Over time, these pressures mount. Some households, likely those with means or connections elsewhere, begin to leave. The neighborhood's population slowly dwindles. This depopulation then feeds back into the maintenance crisis. Fewer people means fewer taxpayers to fund repairs, and fewer hands available for the communal labor that kept the system running. The social fabric, once woven tightly around shared water management, begins to fray. What was a single point of failure now becomes a zone of permanent deficit. The abandoned terraces, no longer maintained, erode faster during the next rain, dumping more silt into the channels below, further reducing their capacity. The cycle reinforces itself. Less water leads to fewer people, which leads to less maintenance, which leads to even less water. This hydraulic death spiral would not have been uniform. Some districts, perhaps those fed by a reliable spring or a well-maintained cistern network, might have persisted for decades longer, creating islands of relative comfort in a city slowly draining of its lifeblood. But the overall trajectory was toward fragmentation and retreat. The system that had once unified the desert landscape into a single, productive organism now broke into isolated, struggling parts. The genius of Petra was its interconnectedness. Its downfall was the slow severing of those connections, one channel, one terrace, one neighborhood at a time, until the memory of abundance became a story too distant to believe. For centuries after its decline, Petra slept beneath a veil of sand and legend. Western explorers who rediscovered it in the early 1800s were spellbound by the facades, those silent, majestic faces emerging from the rock. They saw a city of tombs, a necropolis in the wilderness, a place defined by death and grandeur. The narrative they crafted was one of romantic mystery, a lost city that seemed to have been conjured from the desert by sheer will. They marveled at the architecture but missed the infrastructure. They walked over the covered water channels in the Sick without realizing the street itself was a pipe. They saw the stone dams and assumed they were fortifications or failed buildings. The true story of Petra, the story of its life, remained hidden in plain sight, written in lines of stone and mortar that nobody knew how to read. The shift from seeing a city in the desert to understanding a city built by water management was a slow revolution in perspective, led not by treasure hunters, but by patient observers with a different kind of vision. It began with individuals who looked past the monuments and started asking practical questions. Where did the people get their water? How could so many have lived here? These simple queries opened the door to a completely new Petra. One of the pivotal figures in this rediscovery was a German engineer and archaeologist named Ernst Bruno. In the early 1900s, Bruno did something radical for his time. He systematically mapped Petra, but his map was not just of the famous tombs. It meticulously recorded the lines of ancient terracing on the hillsides, the locations of cistern openings, and the faint traces of channels. He was one of the first to propose that these features were not incidental, but formed a coherent, engineered system. He saw the desert not as an empty space between ruins, but as a canvas covered with the faded blueprints of survival. His work provided the first skeletal framework, suggesting that the true wonder of Petra was its manipulation of the landscape. The real breakthrough, however, came decades later when archaeology matured into a science of soil and context. Teams began to excavate not just temples but the spaces between them. They dug down into the city floor and found the terracotta pipes. They cleared the silt from long-abandoned reservoirs and analyzed the waterproof plaster. They traced the courses of channels up into the surrounding mountains, discovering diversion dams and catchment systems far from the urban center. Each finding was a piece of a vast puzzle. An American archaeologist named Philip Hammond, working extensively at Petra in the 1960s and 70s, dedicated years to studying the water system. His team cleared and documented the Great Dam at the entrance to the Sic and its diversion tunnel, finally explaining its clear, non-military purpose. They mapped the intricate network within the city itself, showing how water was distributed to homes and public spaces. This was no longer speculation. It was physical proof of a hydraulic society. Perhaps the most comprehensive understanding has come from a more recent, interdisciplinary approach. Modern projects use satellite imagery, geographic information system mapping, and hydrological modeling to see the entire watershed as the Nabateans did. Researchers can now calculate catchment areas, estimate reservoir capacities, and model flood paths with digital precision. This technology has revealed the staggering scale and integration of the system, confirming that every slope, every wadi was part of a planned design. The work of scholars like Dr. Leanne Bedal, who focused on the garden and pool complex at the heart of Petra, demonstrated how water was not just for utility but for creating lavish, paradisiacal spaces. These archaeologists, engineers, and hydrologists collectively performed a kind of historical resurrection. They listened to the whispers in the stone channels and heard the echo of flowing water. They read the scars on the landscape as instructions for life. Their patient work transformed Petra from a beautiful corpse into a living engine, a monument not to death, but to the brilliant, sustained effort of staying alive. The city's greatest secret was not hidden in a tomb. It was flowing all around them, waiting for someone to finally trace its course. The silent channels of Petra have finally found their voice through modern eyes. For decades, the full scope of the Nabataean water network remained fragmented, a collection of disconnected ruins whose grand design was lost to time. Today, a technological revolution is allowing us to see their work not as isolated artifacts, but as a single, breathtaking blueprint. Researchers are employing tools that would seem like magic to the ancient engineers, yet they serve a profoundly similar purpose: to map the invisible flow of water. Geographic Information System Mapping, or GIS, is one such tool. It allows scientists to layer every known piece of data: the location of a dam, the slope of a wadi, the outline of a terrace onto a precise digital model of the landscape. This is more than just a map, it is a dynamic simulation. With this model, hydrologists can calculate the exact catchment area of a single cistern. They can input rainfall data and watch a virtual flash flood course down the mountains, tracing the paths the Nabateans chose to divert and capture it. This technology transforms educated guesses into quantitative evidence. We can now state with confidence how many gallons of water a particular reservoir could hold, or how many people a given agricultural terrace could have fed. It provides the hard numbers that underscore their engineering prowess, moving the narrative from impressive speculation to proven fact. But some secrets are buried too deep for satellites to see. That is where ground-penetrating radar comes in. This device sends harmless radio pulses into the Earth, painting a picture of what lies beneath the surface without moving a single stone. In Petra, it has been used to trace the subterranean routes of ceramic pipelines that have been lost for millennia. It can reveal the outlines of silt-filled cisterns hidden under centuries of accumulated soil, showing their true size and shape. This non-invasive archaeology is like giving the landscape an X-ray, revealing the hidden veins of the hydraulic system without disturbing the delicate ruins above. Perhaps the most profound revelation comes from combining these tools. Satellite imagery can identify subtle, linear discolorations in the soil, the ghostly imprint of a long-buried channel stretching across a distant plateau. GIS can then model how that channel would have fed into the larger network, and ground-penetrating radar can confirm its existence on site. This multi-layered approach allows researchers to connect dots across miles of rugged terrain, proving that what looked like random stone walls were actually part of an integrated plan for water distribution. The result is a revelation of scale and intention. We now understand that the Nabateans managed water across an area of dozens of square miles with the precision of modern civil engineers. We can model their watersheds and appreciate the foresight in placing a diversion dam exactly where it would intercept the most destructive force of a flood. This technological archaeology does not diminish their achievement, it elevates it. It provides the definitive proof that Petra was not a city that happened to have some clever water tricks. It was, from its very foundation, a monumental hydrological project. The stones have always held the story. Now, with these new eyes, we can finally read it in its entirety, understanding not just what they built, but the magnificent, calculated mind with which they built it. Petra's story is far more than an ancient engineering manual. It is a profound conversation with our own future, echoing across the desert of centuries to speak directly to the challenges we face today. Our modern world grapples with a hauntingly familiar paradox: how to sustain growing populations in regions where water is increasingly scarce. We watch reservoirs dwindle, aquifers drop, and cities ration a resource once taken for granted. In this light, the silent stones of Petra are not just ruins. They are a masterclass in adaptive design, offering principles that feel startlingly urgent. The first lesson is their fundamental philosophy of working with nature, not against it. The Nabateans did not dream of importing a distant river. They became meticulous students of their own local environment, learning to capture every drop the sky provided right where it fell. This principle of hyper-local, closed-loop water management is a powerful antidote to our often energy-intensive models of moving water across vast distances. It champions resilience through decentralization, encouraging communities to see their immediate landscape as a partner in survival. Their system was built on the bedrock of conservation. Every channel, every cistern, every layer of plaster was a declaration that no water could be wasted. This was not a choice born of virtue, but of absolute necessity. In a world where waste is often invisible, their example reminds us that true security is built on a culture of meticulous stewardship, where every resource is accounted for and valued. Perhaps the most vital lesson is the inseparable link they demonstrated between environmental stewardship and civilizational resilience. Petra's golden age was not sustained by trade wealth alone. It was sustained by the social contract that maintained the water system, the shared labor, the specialized knowledge, the fair administration of a common resource. When that contract frayed, the physical infrastructure began to fail. Their history suggests that a society's longevity is not measured by its grandest monuments, but by its commitment to maintaining the invisible systems that support daily life. For us, facing a climate of growing extremes, Petra stands as a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. It proves that scarcity can be the mother of profound innovation, not just deprivation. The challenge is not merely to replicate their cisterns or channels, but to rediscover their mindset, one of deep observation, patient investment in infrastructure, and a collective understanding that our fates are intertwined with the careful management of the world immediately around us. Their legacy is a blueprint for building civilizations that are not just impressive but enduring, reminding us that the most sustainable future may be written in the language of an ancient, life-giving patience. The true wonder of Petra is not what meets the eye but what flowed beneath it. We began with a city that seemed an impossible mirage, a collection of breathtaking facades in a barren land. We leave it understanding something far more profound, a hydraulic empire. The Nabatean story is a masterclass in human adaptation, a testament to the power of deep observation and patient engineering. Their genius was not in defying the desert, but in listening to it. They learned its rhythms, mapped its invisible pathways, and then, with breathtaking ingenuity, wrote their own rules upon the landscape. They turned destructive floods into gentle streams, porous rock into sealed vaults, and barren cliffs into fertile terraces. Every carved tomb, every bustling street, every garden courtyard was made possible by this silent, relentless system. The glorious city we admire today was not built by stonecutters alone. It was built by the surveyors who calculated impossible slopes, by the plasterers who mixed the secret waterproof seal, by the countless hands that cleared silt from channels year after year. Petra stands as a monument, yes, but not merely to art or wealth. It is a monument to the infrastructure of survival, to the often invisible networks of knowledge and labor that allow any civilization to rise and endure. When we look at the great wonders of the ancient world, we must train ourselves to see past the spectacle. Look for the water, look for the roads, look for the quiet, practical systems that turned grand visions into lived reality. For it is there, in the hidden architecture of daily life, that the true foundations of human achievement are always laid.